Harbor Freight just added new set of tools that solve everyday problems in simple, practical ways most people don't realize exist. This video runs through 12 of them in a straight countdown, so you can see what each tool is designed to do and why it's worth taking a closer look when you're in the store. I've already spent time reviewing how these tools are built, what they're meant to be used for, and where they actually make work easier instead of more complicated. The last tool on this list is one people often overlook, but once you have it, it ends up solving more problems than you expect and saving real money over time. 12. 5-outlet power hub. This is one of those tools Harbor Freight quietly added that most people walk past because it doesn't look like much at first glance. It's a compact power hub designed to sit out in the open, with 5 outlets stacked vertically and angled so larger plugs don't block each other. If you haven't noticed it yet, that's normal. It doesn't demand attention, and that's part of why it's easy to miss. The problem it solves shows up the moment you actually start working. A battery charger is plugged in, a work light is running, maybe a fan is going, or a corded tool needs power for just a few minutes. With a normal power strip, plugs overlap, cords sprawl, and something always has to be unplugged to make room. The mess isn't dramatic, but it slows everything down and turns simple tasks into small interruptions that add up over time. This hub fixes that by changing how power is accessed instead of just adding more outlets. By keeping plugs separated and facing different directions, everything stays usable at the same time. The built-in USB ports quietly handle phones, inspection lights, and rechargeable accessories without burning a full outlet. Once it's in place, the workspace feels more organized, not because anything new was added, but because friction was removed. And that's the key difference. It doesn't make your tools stronger or faster. It makes them easier to live with. Charging becomes automatic. Cords stop piling up. Power stops being something you have to think about while you're trying to get work done. The next tool on this list tackles a very different kind of problem. One you might only run into a few times a year, but when it shows up, not having the right tool turns a simple task into an expensive detour. 11. Icon TPMS toolkit. This is another tool that was recently added and easy to overlook if you're not actively shopping for it, because it doesn't look impressive on the shelf and it doesn't advertise itself loudly. The Icon TPMS tool is designed specifically for modern vehicles with tire pressure monitoring systems. And if you haven't noticed it before, that's because most people only discover these tools after a warning light refuses to go away. The tension starts the first time you rotate tires, swap wheels, or replace a single bad sensor. On many vehicles, the system doesn't automatically relearn. The light stays on, the car thinks something is wrong, and suddenly a basic maintenance task turns into a dealership visit. The frustrating part is that nothing is actually broken. The car just needs to be told what order the sensors are in. Without a tool like this, you're stuck guessing or paying someone else to push a few buttons for you. This kit removes that uncertainty. It activates each sensor, walks the vehicle through the relearn process, and lets you confirm which sensor is responding and which one isn't. Instead of replacing parts blindly or wondering if the car is malfunctioning, you get direct feedback. That changes the experience from trial and error to a controlled, repeatable process. Once you've used it a couple of times, tire rotations and seasonal wheel swaps stop feeling like something you need to schedule around a shop. Where it really pays off is confidence. You stop questioning whether the problem is the car, the sensor, or something you missed. You know immediately what's working and what isn't, and that alone saves time, frustration, and unnecessary replacements. The next tool takes that same idea of avoiding wasted effort, but applies it to a completely different situation. One where the wrong approach doesn't just cost time, it physically wears you out for no good reason. 10. 15-inch black tactical zip ties. These are another quiet addition that's easy to miss because everyone thinks they already know what a zip tie is. On the rack, they look like a slightly bigger version of something you've owned forever. But the difference shows up the first time you actually need to secure something that isn't small, neat, or cooperative. They're fine for light wiring or quick indoor jobs, but the moment you try to bundle a hose, secure a loose panel, or control a heavy extension cord, they come up short. Literally, you end up chaining two together, over-tightening them, or just accepting that the fix is temporary. That's not a dramatic failure, but it's unreliable, and it shows up exactly when you're trying to move on with your day. The payoff here is size and strength. At 15 inches long and noticeably thicker, these ties handle jobs that normal ones can't. Larger cable bundles stay tight. Hoses and cords stop sagging. Underhood fixes, outdoor use, and trunk carry become realistic instead of risky. The black nylon also holds up better to heat and sun, which means they don't turn brittle and snap when you actually need them to hold. Once you start using longer ties, you stop treating them as disposable clutter and start keeping them on purpose. In the garage, the truck, and anywhere something might need to be restrained quickly and securely. They don't replace proper repairs, but they bridge the gap between broken and handled better than most people expect. Coming up is a tool that lives at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not about brute strength or holding things together, but about precision, control, and fixing the small details that bigger tools tend to destroy. 9. Bauer Corded Rotary Tool with Flex Shaft. This is one of the newer additions that tends to blend in because rotary tools all look familiar on the shelf. Most people assume they already know what it does and keep walking. The difference here isn't the concept, it's how usable it actually is once you put it to work. The tension shows up when a job needs finesse instead of force. A full-size grinder is too aggressive, hand tools are too slow. Cordless rotary tools seem convenient, but the speed drops as the battery fades, and that inconsistency makes small cuts, cleanup work, or shaping feel sloppy. You end up compensating with pressure, which usually makes things worse. The payoff comes from two choices Harbor Freight made here. First, keeping it corded means the speed stays steady the entire time, which matters when you're cutting plastic, trimming metal edges, or cleaning up a tight spot. Second, the flex shaft moves the weight of the motor off your hand. Instead of gripping a bulky tool, you're holding a slim, pen-like handle that gives you far more control. Longer sessions become easier, and delicate work stops feeling like a fight. Once this is on your bench, it starts handling the jobs you used to avoid or rush through. Burrs get cleaned up instead of ignored. Plastic fits the way it should. Small fixes stop turning into big workarounds. It doesn't replace heavy tools. It fills the gap they leave behind. What follows is a tool that solves a completely different kind of problem. One that usually ends with people throwing something away, not because it's unusable, but because they don't realize it can be reinforced instead of replaced. 8. Maddox Hot Stapler Plastic Repair Tool. This is a newer tool that a lot of people don't recognize yet, mostly because plastic repair isn't something most shoppers think about until something actually breaks. On the shelf, it looks simple. In practice, it changes what you consider replaceable. Cracked plastic shows up everywhere. Vehicle trim, bumpers, tool housings, storage bins, lawn equipment. Most of the time, the part isn't destroyed. It's fractured just enough to keep spreading every time it flexes. That's usually when people give up and start looking for a replacement, even though the rest of the part is perfectly usable. This tool works differently from melting plastic and hoping it holds. It heats a small metal staple and embeds it across the crack, reinforcing the plastic from the inside. Once it cools, that staple acts like internal support, stopping the crack from growing and restoring strength where the plastic failed. The surface can be trimmed and cleaned up afterward, but the real strength is already locked in underneath. What makes this especially useful is how quickly it turns a frustrating situation into something manageable. Instead of delaying a repair or living with a broken piece, you can stabilize it immediately and move on. Over time, that changes how often things get thrown away, especially parts that are expensive or annoying to replace. The next tool takes that same idea of control and applies it to a much bigger job. One where the wrong tool doesn't just slow you down, it makes the work far harder than it needs to be. 7. Hercules 20 volts brushless rotary hammer. This is one of those tools people notice only after they need it, because until then, a regular drill feels good enough. Harbor Freight added this to the Hercules lineup quietly, and unless you're already thinking about concrete or masonry work, it's easy to miss what it actually changes. The difference shows up the first time you drill into concrete, brick, or block. A standard hammer drill relies on vibration, which means more pressure, more noise, and slower progress. Holes take longer, bits heat up, and your arms do more work than they should. It feels like you're fighting the material instead of cutting through it. This rotary hammer works in a completely different way. The internal hammering mechanism fractures the concrete while the bit rotates, so the tool does the work instead of you. Holes drill straighter and faster, and the effort drops immediately. Being brushless helps here too. The power stays consistent instead of fading as the tool heats up, which matters when you're drilling multiple anchors or mounting hardware in one session. Because it runs on the Hercules 20-volt platform, it fits into an existing cordless setup instead of forcing you to go corded or buy into another battery system. That makes masonry work feel like a normal part of a project instead of a special case you dread. Light chipping, anchor installation, and block drilling become routine instead of exhausting. Up next is something that looks much bigger and more serious, but it solves a problem that isn't about effort at all. It's about keeping everything running when power isn't guaranteed. 6. Tri-fuel inverter generator. This is one of the larger tools Harbor Freight added that changes how people think about backup power. On the floor, it looks like a serious machine, but what makes it stand out isn't just size, it's flexibility. Being able to run on gasoline, propane, or natural gas means this generator fits into far more situations than a single fuel unit ever could. Most generators solve only part of the problem. Gasoline gives you power, but fuel storage becomes an issue. Propane lasts longer, but output can be limited. Natural gas, when available, removes the refueling question entirely. Having all three options in one unit means you're not locked into one plan when conditions change. That matters during long outages, job site use, or situations where fuel availability isn't predictable. The inverter design is another quiet advantage. Instead of rough fluctuating power, this produces cleaner electricity that's safer for modern appliances and electronics. It also tends to run quieter and more efficiently, which makes extended use far more tolerable. Add in electric start, remote start capability, and built-in carbon monoxide monitoring. And it's clear this was designed to be used regularly, not just stored and forgotten. Even with its output, it's built to be moved when needed. Large wheels and a solid frame make it manageable to reposition, whether it's coming out for an outage or heading to a job site. It's not casual equipment, but for the situations it's meant for, it removes a lot of uncertainty. Quick note before we keep going. If this breakdown has been useful so far, liking the video and subscribing helps keep these kinds of tool reviews coming. The next tool swings hard in the opposite direction. It's small, inexpensive, and easy to underestimate, but it ends up being one of the most frequently used items once you actually start keeping it around. 5. Digital angle finder. Level. This is one of those tools that almost disappears on the shelf because it looks too simple to matter. Harbor Freight added this digital angle finder quietly, and unless you're already thinking about accuracy, it's easy to overlook it as just another small measuring gadget. In reality, it solves a problem most people don't realize they're dealing with until mistakes start stacking up. Anytime you're cutting, drilling, or installing something that needs to be straight, level, or set to a repeatable angle, small errors compound fast. Eyeballing works for rough work, but it falls apart on shelves, trim, brackets, or anything that needs to line up cleanly with existing surfaces. Bubble levels help, but they don't tell you how far off something actually is, and they're useless for setting precise angles. That's where this tool earns its place. The angle finder gives you a clear digital readout you can trust. You can zero it on a reference surface, then move it to your workpiece, and see exactly what's happening instead of guessing. Miter saw setups become faster because you're not sneaking up on an angle with test cuts. Drilling at consistent angles becomes repeatable instead of hopeful. Even checking whether a surface is truly flat or slightly pitched takes seconds instead of trial and error. What really changes with a tool like this is workflow. Instead of cutting, checking, adjusting, and recutting, you set the angle once and move on. That saves material, time, and frustration, especially on projects where alignment matters more than raw strength. It's also surprisingly useful for checking existing work, like confirming whether a wall, floor, or bracket is actually square before you build off of it. Over time, this stops being a specialty tool and starts living with your measuring gear. It doesn't make jobs more complicated or slower. It removes the uncertainty that usually shows up right before something goes wrong. Coming up is a tool designed for the opposite situation, not when things are slightly off, but when something is already damaged, rounded, or refusing to move, and you need a way forward without making it worse. 4. Icon bolt extractor. Master set. This is one of those tools you don't notice until a job suddenly stops moving. Harbor Freight added this extractor set without much noise, and unless you've already dealt with rounded or seized fasteners, it's easy to miss why it matters. The value shows up the moment a bolt head is damaged just enough that a normal socket won't hold. Most fasteners don't fail cleanly. They round slightly. They rust just enough. They slip once, then every attempt after that makes things worse. That's usually when people escalate force instead of control, hammering on sockets, grabbing pliers, or leaning harder on a wrench. That approach often damages surrounding parts and turns a simple removal into a bigger repair. This extractor set is built to reverse that spiral. The internal profile bites into the fastener as torque increases, so the harder the bolt resists, the more the socket grips. Instead of slipping off, it digs in. That changes how you approach stuck hardware. You're no longer trying to overpower the problem. You're letting the tool do the work in a controlled way. What makes this set especially useful is coverage. Different sizes mean you're not forcing a near fit and hoping it works. When the extractor matches the fastener properly, removal feels deliberate instead of desperate. Bolts come out cleaner, threads are more likely to survive, and you're far less likely to damage whatever the fastener was holding in place. Over time, having extractors on hand changes behavior. You stop pushing damaged bolts past the point of no return. You switch tools earlier, keep things intact, and finish jobs that would otherwise stall out halfway through. Next up is a tool that doesn't deal with stuck parts at all, but it quietly fixes something most people accept as, well, part of the mess, instead of something that can be handled cleanly. 3. Pittsburgh Transfer Pump Kit. This is a newer, easily overlooked kit that doesn't look impressive on the shelf, but it handles a task that most people do the hard way. Moving fluids, oil, coolant, gear lube, fuel is usually messy, slow, and wasteful without the right setup. Pouring straight from containers leads to spills. Funnels tip over. Drips end up where they shouldn't. Over time, that mess turns into contamination, slippery floors, and wasted fluid. It's not dramatic, but it's inefficient and frustrating. This kit simplifies that process. Instead of lifting and pouring, you transfer fluid cleanly from one container to another, or directly into the system. That control makes routine maintenance smoother and reduces cleanup time. It also lowers the chance of mixing fluids or introducing debris where it doesn't belong. Once fluid handling becomes clean and predictable, maintenance stops feeling like a chore you put off. It becomes something you handle quickly and move on from without the usual mess. What comes next isn't about fixing, removing, or transferring anything. It's about seeing a problem clearly before it turns into something bigger. 2. Braun Rechargeable High CRI Inspection Light. This is one of those tools that feels unnecessary right up until the moment you actually need to see something clearly. Harbor Freight added this light quietly. And unless you've struggled with shadows, glare, or washed out lighting, it's easy to underestimate what it changes. Most work lights are bright, but brightness alone isn't the problem. Harsh light flattens details, hides cracks, and makes it hard to tell what you're actually looking at, under a hood, behind a dash, or inside a cabinet. That leads to second guessing and missed details. You end up repositioning the light constantly, instead of focusing on the task. This light fixes that by prioritizing clarity over raw output. The high CRI beam renders surfaces more accurately, so edges, leaks, wear marks, and fasteners stand out instead of blending together. Being rechargeable means it's always ready, and the slim profile lets it fit where bulkier lights can't. Once you start using it, you realize how much time you were wasting just trying to get decent visibility. It becomes one of those tools you don't think about until it's not there. Inspection turns faster, mistakes drop, small issues get noticed early instead of after something fails. What comes next isn't about seeing problems, it's about confirming them. It's a tool that replaces guessing with certainty, especially when a small symptom could point to a much bigger issue. 1. Maddox Radiator Pressure Test Kit. This is one of those tools that doesn't stand out unless you already know what it's for, and that's exactly why so many people miss it. Harbor Freight added this kit quietly, but it solves a problem that almost every vehicle owner eventually runs into: coolant issues that don't have an obvious cause. Cooling problems rarely fail in a clean, dramatic way. A reservoir level drops slowly. The car smells warm after a drive. The temperature needle moves just enough to make you nervous. Without a way to test the system, most people end up guessing. Parts get replaced one at a time, hoping the issue goes away, even though nothing was actually confirmed to be bad. This kit changes that by letting you pressurize the cooling system and see what's really happening. Leaks that only show up under pressure reveal themselves. Weak caps stop pretending they're fine. Small seepage points become visible before they turn into roadside failures. Instead of wondering whether the problem is serious, you get a clear answer in minutes. Once you've used a pressure tester, the whole process feels backwards without it. Diagnosis becomes controlled instead of reactive. You stop chasing symptoms and start confirming causes. Over time, that prevents unnecessary part swaps and catches issues early when they're cheaper and easier to deal with. That's the difference with tools like this. They don't just help you fix something, they change how you approach problems in the first place. Instead of working around uncertainty, you remove it entirely. If you've made it this far, you've now seen tools most people walk past without realizing how much easier they make everyday work. None of these are about hype or collecting gear. They're about removing friction, solving small problems early, and avoiding bigger ones later. If this breakdown helped you spot something worth checking out next time you're in the store, hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel. And I'll see you in the next one.